to look comfortable.
So where were you born?
I was born in Lisbon, Portugal.
How did you get there?
My parents were there. My mother happened to be there when I was born.
So how did your parents get?
How did your parents get to Portugal?
Now we're starting a whole.
Right,
Actually, they met in Portugal. You see, this doesn't help him,
It's fine, just talk.
huh?
It's tough to
So
just
tell
talk.
me, your mother was born blah blah, your father was born blah blah, and then how your mother left wherever she was with her mother. You need to fill up an hour.
Stop it, it's fine. One of my friends, her grandmother was talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers for 20 minutes. The teacher just wants us to see that we understand like how to type up an interview.
Okay, so the question was, how did my parents get there? My parents came to Portugal in 1923. 1919, which is the year right after World War I, things were very bad in Europe for the Jewish people. And Jews in Poland and Russia scattered to Germany and came across to the United States. My mother was born in Lemberg, which is today Lvov in the Ukraine. That time was Poland. My mother, at that time, 1919, she was 13 years old. And she and her mother were going to, my grandmother was divorced. My grandmother had a store in Lemberg, a food store. And then one morning she was walking with my mother in hand to the store, and as she was approaching the store, she passed by the shul, the synagogue. The synagogue was in flames. The people in the town put a match to the synagogue. My grandmother didn't even go back to the house to get her things. She continued walking with just the cash that she needed to open the store to the train station, and she got tickets to the next train out in whatever direction it was taking. And they were in hiding in the mountains with one of their cousins. And that was my mother's side of the story. My father moved to Breslau, which is on the other side of the Polish border in Germany, and he studied dentistry. And at that time, he was very active in Zionist movement in 1923, 22, 23, and had no chance of coming to Palestine because the British would not permit Jews to come to Palestine in those days. So the alternative was, they heard of a Portuguese consul in Germany and Poland who encouraged people, who made it easy for people to come to Portugal and live in Portugal. And my father and his friends said, what a great idea. Let's all go to Portugal, buy a farm, and we'll have a hachshara. We'll learn how to become farmers. And then one day when things change in Palestine and we make aliyah, we'll become chalutzim. Anyhow, so my father moved to Portugal. My mother, trying to get away from Poland with her mother, met up with the same Portuguese consul, and they ended up in Portugal. Actually, that's where my parents met, and so in 1923 they settled into Portugal, and life went on. Eventually, I was born. I was born in 1930. And I was in Portugal from 1930 until 1941. My father was a dentist, became a dentist. He had to study dentistry before he came to Portugal. And he had a pretty active practice. One of his patients happened to be the German, in 1933, when Hitler came to power, he, as head of the community, he became head of the community in Portugal, and he issued a declaration condemning what Hitler was doing. One of my father's patients was a German ambassador, and we found out that the Gestapo had that paper in their possession. So we realized that if the Germans would come into Portugal in the late, from 39 on, then my father would probably be the first one they would take away. So we said, all right, let's come to the United States. That wasn't that easy because the State Department had a rule that if you have family in occupied territory, because my grandmother had gone back to Poland, then you could not come to the United States because the Germans might put pressure on her to spy for Germany if we would come to the States. So we left Portugal in 41. We had to leave Portugal in 41. And the only place we could go to was Cuba. And we settled in Cuba. We were in Cuba for 3 years. I was bar mitzvah in Cuba. And it was interesting. This was people that came to Cuba were from Belgium. And they created their own diamond industry there because they're from Antwerp. And part of what was there was Shomer Hadati, which is today Bnei Akiva. So I became very active at the age of 11, 12 in Shomer Hadati, which was the precursor to Bnei Akiva, through all these people that came from Antwerp. My father learned he couldn't practice dentistry because he had to go to school. So he said, I'll become a diamond sewer. So he learned how to sew diamonds. And we were in Cuba from 1941 to 1944 when we came to the States. It was a simple move from, they had 2-engine planes. Pan Am Airways had a flight from Havana to Miami. We ended up in Miami, took the train to New York, and ended up in Kew Gardens where we settled. So we settled in Kew Gardens from 1944, where I grew up. Went to TA for a while. Problem was that in Portugal, fourth graders already have algebra and French as a second language. So when I came to the United States, I had algebra already. I was already in high school, so I was way ahead of what my class, my background and what was available at TA somehow couldn't work out. So I ended up at Forest Hills High School where I graduated. I had many jobs at that time. We would go. I had a job in the local deli. I delivered for the local deli. Was not a Jewish store at the time, and one of my favorite jobs was to peel potatoes that came out of the pot before they made potato salad. Also dip into a barrel of herring and squeeze out the water so they can make up herring salad without too much water. Great jobs. I don't even remember what they paid for it. Probably 75 cents an hour. And all the tips.
So you said that you flew from Cuba to America. I'm assuming you didn't fly from Portugal to Cuba.
No,
so how did you get there?
No, we had a ship, a Portuguese ship with a big Portuguese flag. Portugal was neutral. The first night out of Lisbon, a British submarine stopped us. The second night was a German submarine, and they stopped us. And being neutral, they allowed us to go through. So we took the ship from Lisbon to Havana. Arrived on Rosh Hashanah. Actually, first day of Rosh Hashanah was on board of the ship. The second day was in Havana. That's my recollection.
So when the Germans, did they stop you or anything?
No, they just checked the papers because it was a neutral ship. So in those days, as nasty as wars are, somehow they were more civilized. Today, this wouldn't even have happened like that. Everybody, Portuguese gave them a couple of bottles of port wine, and they saluted each other, and they waved goodbye, and then the next. So this is things, it's like the Red Baron in World War One. After he would shoot down a British plane, he would salute the British pilot, and vice versa. So there was a lot of war was sort of a like the knights in the old days. They would wave to each other, and so it was a different atmosphere. Yes, we landed in Cuba, and Cuba was a very nice place. It lived in a nice apartment, nice street, nice people. It was not. This is before Castro, way before Castro. Actually, Cuba was a tourist destination for Americans. I mean, they had gambling there, probably mafia in some of these hotels, but this was really a very nice place. We came to the United States, and I went to Forest Hills High School, graduated to Forest Hills High School. This was 1948. 1948, of course, was when the state of Israel became independent, and I wanted to make Aliyah. My father said, you're only a high school graduate. What are you going to contribute to the state? Many of my friends who were involved with Shomer Hadata here in the States, or B'nai Akiva, they had been in the army during World War II. They had radar experience, so they went, but they had something to contribute to the War of Independence. I said, you know what? Okay, I will go to a school, and I went to Brooklyn Community College, and I learned construction because I figured, okay, at least I come to Israel, and I will have a profession. Bottom line is, I graduated from Brooklyn Community College after 2 years, and within months I was taken it was during the Korean War. In 1951, I ended up in the Army. Was in the Army in the States from 1951 through the end of 51.
It was a draft.
It was a draft. I was drafted. And I ended up in Korea. I was 13 months in Korea and came out of the Army in 1953.
How was it in Korea? Like, were you treated differently because you were Jewish?
No, well, you're in the Army, so everybody's equal. And we ended up in Korea still. This is, I don't know if you're aware of this history of the Korean War. The North Korea overran South Korea. Eventually, the United States got involved. And when the United States got involved, the Chinese came across from the north, and they really came all the way south. And the United States the Marines landed in Incheon, which is cutting the peninsula in half. And so that sort of stabilized things. So there were a lot of Chinese soldiers who ended up in the mountains, and they became bandits. What I was doing, because of my construction background and drafting background, I was preparing. I joined a team of 2 other people, a captain and another person who was a statistician, and we maintained records for the general command in Korea. And we prepared charts with graphs, ammunition on hand, food on hand, VD rate, and we had a whole book that we presented to the general command once a month with all these statistics. And I would travel in Korea either by plane or by train. And in the middle of the night, the train would have to stop because there was some shooting ahead, But that's the extent of my experience in Korea. Came out of Korea in 1953, and I went back to Columbia to continue a school of construction. And then...
Is this still at community college?
No, Columbia University. I took night courses. I got a job with Republic Steel. We designed a number of buildings, and one of them was the General Assembly Building, the United Nations General Assembly Building. We designed all the structural steel for that building. And eventually I met this nice woman called Kina Rabinowitz. Now she's called Kina Hiller. and I guess within 9 months we were married.
Right.
From the time we had went on a date,
When was
Erev
your first date?
Slichas, Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, Slichas night. I think it was September 21.
I don't remember.
September 21, and we got married in June. That's 9 months.
How was the wedding?
June of 55.
How was
Huh?
the wedding? Was it a traditional type of wedding or Jewish?
It was
or
a traditional
American?
wedding with a lot of food. A lot of food. That's before we had single malt scotch, so, you know.
Were both of your families from the same religious background?
Yeah, pretty similar.
Yeah.
Pretty similar.
Is-
It was a good match.
How many years is it now? 57? 56?
56. We're approaching 57.
Time for a change?
No, never. So anyhow, so that's my background.
So growing up, so that's backpedal to like when you're first growing up.
I'm sorry?
That's backpedal to when you're first growing up. Was it like different for you being from a like foreign country? You know,
No.
9 years old, 10 years old.
No, when I was going to school in Portugal, in Cuba, I went to an American school. So when I came to the States, I spoke English probably better than I speak now. So it was fine. It was integrated very quickly. I became very active in Kew Gardens because of my background with the Shomer Hadati B'nai Akiva. We were able to get youngsters from Forest Hills and Regal Park and Woodside and from South Ozone Park to get together from frequently, and we had a sniff, and we had activities in Queens. That was the beginning.
So what were those activities? Were
Huh?
they like trying to like Zionistic
Just
activities?
we
or
would meet
fun?
on Shabbat. We would have the usual meetings on Shabbat with Shomer Hadati or B'nai Akiva, and we would have a sikha, and we'll have a Devar Torah, and we would have sports, and we go to Moshava. Those days, Moshava was in Livingston Manor, and Moshava was all intense. It was intense, but it was intense. And
Were they
no fancy bunks, no air conditioning, just leaky tents. But so this was fun. It was good preparation for my army days. So it was good.
Wait, so is it intense or intense?
So,
Got it.
oh, I didn't talk about your how active you were in communal affairs. in Kew Gardens.
Oh,
You know.
in Kew Gardens, I grew up in Kew Gardens. Kew Gardens was the Teaneck of those years, and the Kew Garden Synagogue was the big synagogue, probably one of the top synagogue leading communities in Orthodox Jewish communities in the United States. We had the first early childhood program in Queens. We had the first Chaver Kadisha in Queens. We had 5, 6 butcher stores under the supervision of the shul, and it was run like a kahila because a number of our leaders at that time of the community were originated in Breuer and related to the Breuer family. So it was a kahila, which was a community, anything from cradle to grave. It was a very wonderful community to grow up in. Our children grew up in there. We were very active in the days prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. We would go to Times Square, as some of the people my age will remember, went to Times Square with an Israeli flag, and we were collecting quarters and dimes and dollar bills, and this was really the thing.
To hold the flag, big flag, and people all around holding it, and people would come by and throw money into the flag.
We would go through the subway cars and make speeches and walk around basically with a tin cup and collect money. We would speak for Israel, and so this is how we grew up. This was the birth of the State of Israel. It was part of our makeup. I remember clearly the when I was in Cuba, listening to the radio and hearing the landing in Normandy. I remember clearly the vote for the United Nations in November for the partition vote at the United Nations.
So where were you during that vote?
That vote we were in 47, we were already in Kew Gardens.
So how was it? Because you said Kew Gardens was like a family type thing, and you guys all sounded like you.
No, we lived in an apartment house. We lived in one apartment house. When I got married, I moved one block to another apartment house.
One block.
One block. And we had a 3-bedroom apartment. We had a 3-bedroom apartment which means 1 bedroom. And eventually,
Room apartment.
a 3-room apartment which means 1 bedroom. And then we had a 4-room, which means 2 bedrooms. And then we had a 5-room apartment where we had a lot of bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. We moved some walls around, So Kenny got very upset because, what are you doing, tearing the building apart? But my friend Leon Miller, who was an architect, said, he says, oh, it looks pretty nice what Arnon is doing. This is very nice. We had a neighbor, downstairs neighbor was Rabbi Bezdin, Morris Bezdin, who was our Masada Kedushin. Rabbi Bezdin was also the rabbi of the shul when I was growing up. Eventually, he became active at the Yeshiva University. He was the head of the what was that program that he had at YU for youngsters who wanted to. It was an outreach program, and he wanted to bring people closer. Anyhow, he was our downstairs neighbor, and I guess he rearranged his apartment.
So because he arranged his apartment, you were allowed to.
And I said, "What a great idea! Let's do it the same. Let's do it." Anyhow, that's how we lived. It was very comfortable.
Talk about your presidency at Shul.
Eventually, since I grew up in Kew Gardens, I worked my way on the board. On the board, I became secretary. We had a very good system, which I wish would be tried out in today's synagogues, where people are active and lead and chair various committees, so that by the time after a couple of years being active, I had been chairman of the House Committee, of the Kindergarten Committee, of the Adult Education Committee. Once you become chairman of all these different committees, then you qualify to become president, because then you can understand the job better. Today, people move in, get on the board, all of a sudden they're vice presidents, and I really have no concept of what makes a synagogue tick. So the leadership at that time said, okay, to bring people along, that's the way to do it.
So
All the different departments, once you understand the different departments, then you can move along. So I was president there for once for 3 years, and then I was out for 2 years, and then I came back for 4 more years. So I was president for 7 years, which qualified me, when we moved to Teaneck, to become president at the Renat for 2 years.
So when you said that you worked in all these various departments,
years.
what were they like?
Oh, no.
Like what were what type of departments were there? What was your job?
We had a nursery program. We were involved with the Chevra Kadisha. We maintained the building, putting up the building. Actually, the building was built in 1948, the new building. When I was a youngster, when I was 14, when I moved there, I used to play ball in a lot which was eventually to become the big shul. We played ball there. Had a number of friends. Moved to Teaneck, to Kew Gardens. I befriended someone by the name of Wolf Barth, which is no longer alive, but Wolf. Wolf, I guess we were friends for many years. Eventually, when I went into the army, he went into the army, and so we and then he got married and I got married. But we were friends until one day when he was no longer alive. He lived in Riverdale at the time. A lot of the people in Riverdale knew him. I guess one of the teachers at SAR is Beppy Barth, so I was at Wolf's wedding to Beppy. So those are the contacts that you go through as you go through life, and you meet different people, and they grow up and they create families and develop families, and so we saw all these things developing.
What other contacts did you make when you were like younger?
What contacts?
Yeah, like are you still in contact with people from Kew Gardens, from your childhood? 'Cause-
Well, listen, when you move from Kew Gardens to Teaneck or to Bergen County was a decision that we had to make when Aviva, our oldest daughter, moved to this side of the river, and Oren, our son, moved to Fairlawn. We had no choice if we wanted to see our grandchildren grow up. Being in New York and they being in New Jersey made it very difficult to see our grandchildren would grow up. So anyhow, by moving here, we were able to see our grandchildren, all eight of our grandchildren grow up. And they had access to the house, and they would come in and leave crumbs in the kitchen counter so that we would know that they were there, because they knew where the cookies were hidden, and hidden,
They're not hidden, they were in the
with a wink.
That's where they belong.
So what was it like when you first moved to Teaneck? Was that an easy adjustment?
No adjustment required. Moving to Teaneck was easy because going from an apartment house. I lived in an apartment house in Portugal where I was born. I actually was born in the apartment. I was not born in the hospital. And in them days, you're born at home with the help of a midwife. And so I lived in an apartment. Moved to Cuba, we lived in an apartment. Moved to Teaneck, we lived in an apartment.
Kew Gardens.
In Kew Gardens, we lived in an apartment. Moved to Kew Gardens when I got married, moved to another apartment. So we finally had a place, a house where we could sit in the backyard, which we did for about 4 years, and then that stopped.
So when you were in Kew Gardens, what was it like living in an apartment? Was it different? Was it like
No, it was great. It was great because that apartment building was populated. It was a 6-story apartment house. Probably a very high percentage of the residents in the apartment house were members of our shul or the new Stiebloch that sort of sprung up in the neighborhood, and it was a very very nice, with young families. They had young children growing up, strollers, carriages. On the street, on the park. It was a big park. So it was Kew Garden was a very nice community. It was a very warm community. And a very active community.
there were a lot of immigrants beside you?
Yeah, the Kew Gardens Synagogue was started in 1939 by some residents in Kew Gardens. And when the war, a lot of people came and settled in Kew Gardens. So we had a very large community from Antwerp. Again, that same Antwerp that we now had in Cuba. A lot of them moved to Kew Gardens. We had in 1945, after World War II, a large contingent of Persian Jews who lived in London during the war. Came to Kew Gardens. So it was a very, and we had German Jews that lived in Kew Gardens. They were probably the original members of the shul. And a very interesting mix. So we had Belgians, we had people from Germany, and we had from Persia, Iranians, from Meshed, not Tehran, but from Meshed. What was interesting is that everyone respected each other's minhagim. The Germans from Frankfurt had their own minhagim. The ones from Antwerp had their own minhagim. Antwerp was a big center, big Jewish center in Europe. They had a school which was sort of a modern yeshiva. It was Tachimoni. They produced some very fine, well-educated in Jewish subjects people. And you had the Persians. So it was where the Gabbai, one of the Gabbai could be a Persian, and they would rotate with someone who came from Belgium or from Germany. So it crossed across all the Ashkenazi Sephardi line, and it was really a very nice community. And it was really exemplary how we were able to work things out. What's interesting is when I was president, Khomeini came to Iran. When Khomeini came to Iran, Jews left Iran and they moved to the States. And as it turned out, they moved to Kew Gardens because the first wave that came in 45 or 46, these were uncles and cousins from Meshet, and these were Mashedis and someone from Tehran, and they settled in Kew Gardens. And all of a sudden we had this very large group of people that came from Iran. And I was president at the time, and we offered them our social hall as a place where they could have their own minyan, which they did. The original wave still stayed upstairs with the original group. The ones that came from Iran, that freshly from Iran, they were downstairs. Eventually they had the money and they bought property and they built their own shul. So by virtue of what was in Kew Gardens and our shul, it gave them the opportunity to develop their own synagogue. That's still in place. The Persian shul is still in place in Kew Gardens, directly across the street from the Kew Gardens Synagogue. It spun off another group that moved to Great Neck, still very active in Great Neck. So there's a lot of good beginnings as a result of Kew Gardens Synagogue and the nice atmosphere in Kew Gardens Synagogue.
So how was the davening in Kew Gardens Synagogue? Was it was there like a Ashkenaz type davening in your minyan or a Spartan?
Yeah, it was Ashkenaz type davening. We're very precise in the nusach and the discharge of nusach. People had instructors from the cantorial school and at YU. I know that a number of people, including my brother, took lessons. So it wasn't just haphazard as it is today. People followed a nusach and it was carried through to this day. It was interesting. They even had the Kaddish. Every Kaddish has its own nusach when you say. So the Kaddish that you say before Shemon Esrei has one nusach, and the Kaddish that you say after the laning has a different nusach. And they would be very precise in applying these different things. So it's was very structured and very precise, as it was in Europe.
So it sounds like your show is very Yeti oriented. Just by like how you say it, everything's very precise and on time. Or is it just like?
Well, it isn't. I understand what you mean by Yeki. You mean precise. I think that today, I think in Europe, all the shuls, whether we're in Poland or whether we're in Russia or whether we're in Italy or Germany or France, they were run that way. Today, it's a little bit more, okay, let's do it this way. Okay, yeah. And then it's amazing because we create minhag. Like this is the first year of the minhag. Okay, well, we start a whole new minhag, and then eventually people say, well, we did it the same way last year. So that's how these things sort of actually degrade. Instead of maintaining The nusach that we had in Kew Gardens and maintaining these was what was done with by our parents, and by their parents, and by their parents. So there is sort of an erosion here, and it's too bad. So we were more precise in maintaining and running things precisely. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a shul running things in a business-like way. It doesn't run like a business, but you can run in a business-like way. And that's how it was maintained over there. Today it's a little bit more casual. Come to shul in shorts, come to shul without a tie, come to shul without a jacket. So it was a totally different feeling.
Is there a dress code in your shul, or like an unofficial dress code, or
Absolutely, a white shirt for Shabbos.
you're required to wear a student tie also?
No, absolutely. Listen, I have very strong feelings about that. I appeared in court as a witness the other day on a business matter. And when I went to court and I sat before the judge, I was wearing a shirt and tie and a jacket. And if I come to shul and I sit before the judge of judges, how can I dress any differently or any less than that? It would be disrespectful to Kodesh Baruch Hu to a flesh and bones judge treat one way, but in a lesser way, the judge of judges. So that's the rule. That's my criteria.
So when you were growing up in the whole shul, so was anybody allowed to be a chazan, or did you have to take this special course that your brother took, or?
No, but we had the people who were more accomplished when the youngsters were growing up, when they were 11, 12, 13, they would meet. Part of their youth activities would be to get together on the Shabbos and learn to daven. Okay, in other words, the older people would, the ones that were capable, would teach the younger people, so that the many people, my brother being one of them, and my brother's whole generation, wherever they live now, on the West Side or in Florida or wherever they live, they daven this. When they daven, you can tell that they learn to daven in Kew Gardens.
What about the adults? Were there adults that didn't know the nusach that wanted to daven in front of the Amud? Were they allowed to?
We were very restrictive as to who could access the Amud, because we didn't want to embarrass people who were not capable. So what we did, we said, this is the list of people who are acceptable, and we, as a matter of fact, what we did to sort of, we hired a belt filler, not a chazan, but a belt filler, who would daven twice a month. So on 2 Shabbatot, he would daven. One of them would be when they would bench Rosh Chodesh, and that left 2 other Shabbatot so we had somebody who was acceptable to the klal, and he was our shliach tzibur. So it removed the problem of people who were not qualified for davening, knowledge of nusach, people who were not qualified because they wouldn't act appropriately, or they, as a shliach tzibur, they have to represent the person that stands there at the Omet. He is my representative before the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So he pleads my case, and as such, by limiting the number of people that have access to it, we were able to sort of maintain a certain level. If once we open up, then it's difficult to hold back people, because then you leave yourself open to saying, why did you let him and not me? Okay, and then it's an embarrassment. So this way, nobody was embarrassed, and everybody understood how it works, and it was a very simple solution to an embarrassing problem.
So you said the Baltfilo was paid, and you like also mentioned that you did like all these previous jobs in your shul. So were you compensated for your time or paid or?
No, just about Philip, because I mean he's a hired gun.
So like none of your volunteer work. That was strictly volunteer.
No, volunteers are volunteers. Okay.
So what did you do?
Listen, Rabbi was on a payroll. A secretary in the office was on a payroll, and this Baltfilo was on a payroll, and youth leaders were on payroll, and so on.
So what did you do to make money at that time?
The shul?
No, when you were volunteering with your shul. So were you an adult at that point, or were you still like?
No, I was an adult, but I was already married.
So what were you doing at that time, like to earn an income?
I forgot already. What was I doing? I worked for Republic Steel, as I mentioned before, when I came out of the army. And when I worked for Republic Steel, we did a project. Republic Steel is no longer, I don't think, is in existence anymore. We produced Republic Steel. When I worked for them, they were on a project with another company called U.S. Plywood. And what we did a building which is still in place on 42nd Street. It's the Mobil Oil building, which is stainless steel clad building. Republic Steel produced the steel, stainless steel, that clad that building. And I was taken out of Republic Steel, and I joined a special engineering office. There were 3 of us, and we designed the skin that's on that building. I remember being on that building on 42nd Street between Lexington and 3rd, when it was just steel, the steel floor without the walls. Being in there, it's one of the few high-rise buildings, I guess, what year must it have been? Maybe 57, 58, 59. So I was very much involved in the development of those panels and the special windows. Had to resist hurricane. So that's where I worked. It was a special engineering department.
So like what do you have to do in this department?
Yeah, but then you went to U.S. Plywood on it.
Because we worked together with U.S. Plywood. We worked with U.S. Plywood because the technology that we developed was in conjunction with U.S. Plywood. U.S. Plywood, during World War II, U.S. Plywood made plywood. And plywood means taking sheets of veneer and having presses and pressing it together. They developed, during World War II, 2 skins of steel, one at the bottom, one at the top, and inside was a honeycomb core. And with adhesive and those same presses that they make plywood in, they were able to make very big panels, which would be very flat and very strong. And they used those panels as floors in airplanes and ceilings in airplanes to this day. Because of the strength of the honeycomb core laminated to two metal skins, becomes a very, almost like a beam. Beam could be 4 foot wide by 8 feet long. So we then use these structures to clad some of the buildings today that are on Park Avenue. Those glass towers on Park Avenue, a number of these were done by our office. So we worked, because now you take all these panels and how do you hang it on the face of the building? How do you keep the air out? How do you keep water out? How do you maintain them? How do you keep it looking good? How do you keep? I think the Seagram's building was one of those. Seagram's building is bronze clad skin. The Lever House was a porcelain enamel clad panels. So there's a whole series of these buildings which really came out of our office, and that's what we did. We designed this. This is an outgrowth of a program for schools they use those skins for schools, one-story, two-story schools. I think in Kentucky or Ohio, were this is obviously soon after the war. So like in the early 50s, they wanted to build up schools, and you had this concrete slab, concrete ceiling, and you have to enclose it. And so these were panels that were put into place like a sukkah, like a very big sukkah. Not much different. When you build a sukkah out of plywood, it's like panel upon panel upon panel. From there, I moved to, since we're talking about sukkah panels, we made panels, and we were doing the inside of buildings. Ford Motor Company, Ford Division, Ford Corporate, and Dearborn, and Ford Motor Division. We did some buildings for IBM. We did a few buildings, even one in Anchorage, Alaska. We did the interiors. We did the panels. Taking these same panels that we were cladding the outside, we can now divide space so that these are movable office partitions with wood skins, with fabric skins. Matter of fact, what was that show that's on now?
Mad Men?
Huh?
Mad Men?
Mad Men, which is Madison Avenue.
Yeah.
Well, that was filmed. I saw that a year ago, and I cracked up because the interior was it was our job. It is for Time Life building. Time Life is in the Rockefeller Center, and we did the panels, and it was a aluminum tube with a black reveal, and then so it was an aluminum tube with a black reveal panel, aluminum tube black reveal panel, and that was the interior of this.
Huh.
So these were relocatable apartment panels. From there, I went into my department wasn't much involved. We had an offer from a factory in Germany and Switzerland, cabinets, interwall cabinets to divide space, floor to ceiling. So there's a whole progression, like from skin of buildings to panels that lock together to panels that lock together on interior. And from there, since I'm dividing space, why not, instead of having a wall that doesn't do anything, why not take the furniture off the floor and have instead of creating a building that goes horizontally, goes vertically. Take the furniture that's now occupies space horizontally and take the furniture and have it now go up, which reduces the number of square feet per office, so that now you can have more people per square foot. The office buildings in Manhattan or any other place are expensive, so you want to get as many people per square foot. So it was a progression. It was a very nice progression. And these were all, at that time, these were all pioneer things. These were all unique, just as unique as the iPhone and the iPad and the iPod and all the other things. Today it's all part of history.
Cool. So
Had a good time because this was all interesting projects. None of them was boring. And they were very creative and was very very ahead of the times.
So did you also have to comment, like, were you also part of the planning stages or just the actual building stages?
We were a resource to architects. Since we produced these products and we had an understanding and knowledge of what our factories could do. Don't forget, U.S. Plywood had plants all over the United States. We had them on the West Coast, quite a few. We had in Wisconsin, actually near Green Bay. We had them on the East Coast. So we had plants and resources to create all these things. And by virtue of our knowledge, we were able to help the architect develop his space.
So, like, what were you personally doing at that time? At that time, were you like, did your ideas shape the way that buildings are made now, or?
I was part of a team. was part of a creative team that would meet with the architects, and we did one project at that time, which was combining office partitions, relocated office partitions, and floor-to-ceiling furniture to divide space. This project was, at that time, I'm trying to think what year that was, probably in the late 60s, middle 60s. Yeah, probably middle 60s, early 60s. Like a $3 million job, which was enormous. In $3 million in the 60s is like 30 million today. We did one building for Ted Bates Advertising, which is right off Broadway and Times Square. Because it is Times Square, the trucks would come in and they had to unload at the middle of the night because there's too much going on during day hours. And it was fascinating. I was very much involved in people. At one point, I even had 80 carpenters working for me.
Wow.
I had 80 union carpenters because when you work in Manhattan, you had union labor. You had to have union labor. So these were all many interesting projects, fascinating projects.
So what did you do after that? What did you do after that?
What's that?
What was your next job after?
I don't know. I think 1973 came about, which was one of the other bad recessions. This 73 is when the Middle East countries cut off oil supply, and things really got very, very bad. And I decided to join the family business. Opa, who came here, my father, who came here as a former dentist, who got involved in the diamond business. After the war, I had two uncles two that were still in Portugal, and one who was already in Palestine. After the war, there was a shortage. They needed tires, they needed ball bearings, they needed this, they needed that. And they would contact my father. They said, "Oh, we need tires." So my father would run around and they said, "Okay, I can get tires." And then they would ship the tires to Europe or to Israel or to Palestine in those days. So my father got involved with the export business. That dried up, and all of a sudden he had to convert from export to import because after the war, everybody needed things. So my father, with his poor English, got on the plane, and it took him 24 hours to get, I think, I once went across, when I had to report, when I was going to shipping to Korea, I had to report to Fort Lawton, which is in Seattle. So from flying from New York to Seattle, what meant getting on a plane in LaGuardia. This is before Kennedy. At that time it was called Idlewild. So we flew from New York to Seattle, made the following stops. New York to Detroit. Detroit to Milwaukee. Milwaukee to Butte, Montana. Butte, Montana to Spokane, Washington. And Spokane, Washington to Seattle. So you made all those stops. And you get off the plane and you go into the bar at the airport. I remember Butte, Montana. Montana was a silver state. So if you would, you would give them $10 bill and you had to give you back change. They give you back in silver dollars. I still have some of those silver dollars. So making a trip to the Orient for my father was really quite a trip because you had to make all those stops to get to the West Coast. And then he would settle in L.A., I guess, before Shabbos or for Shabbat. And then he would fly to, I think, Hawaii to Guam, and Guam to Okinawa, and then to either Korea or to Japan or to Hong Kong. So it was like, those days planes were, this is before there were jet planes. This is before the propeller planes with two propellers, and then eventually they had four propellers. Eventually they came to jet planes. So today it's a much smaller world because you can get from one place to the other in a matter of 6 hours to California, and you can get nonstop from New York to Tokyo in 12 hours, which was really probably like a 3-day trip. So things have changed. So anyhow, so I joined my father's business in '73.
You trained your thought. Why was he flying to Korea?
He was flying to Korea to look for products, and my father decided in his wisdom to put together products that were similar. So it had to do with lighting. So it was flashlights and lanterns. Those days they were not out of plastic. They didn't even know what plastic was. These flashlights were out of metal. He would get, in Korea, he found, and in Japan, porcelain factories that made beautiful little kerosene lamps. I wish I had those when we had the power outage. And then kerosene lamps for camping, and so there's a whole product line of lighting products, from kerosene lamps to lanterns to flashlights to batteries. And that business continued for almost 45 years when we sold the business. I joined that business in '73, so I got involved with the export, distribution business. When the company that bought our company, I joined that company. That was part of the deal. My brother and I joined the company. And I started traveling to Europe, doing sourcing and expanded into household products. And
Brabant.
that was Brabantia.
They bought.
No, Brabantia, no. I was traveling to Europe looking for products. This was my assignment. My father retired, and so I continued with sourcing. And I learned from my father early on that the best place to find products is to go to a department store. And you walk through the department store, all of a sudden you say, oh, gee, I have never seen this in the States. I mean, obviously you have to know what's on the market. So before going on a trip, I would go to the stores and see what they have. No point bringing in what they have. The whole idea is to bring in what they don't have. Yeah. And I was once in Milan, and I was walking into a department store, La Rinascente, which is right across from the Duomo. I take the escalator down, and I see this tremendous display of red household products with an Italian name, Brabantia. And I said, gee, this is a beautiful Italian product. Bread boxes in red, and canisters in red, and kitchen tools in red. Great stuff. Tried to contact them. As it turned out, Brabantia was not an Italian product, but it was a Dutch product from the province of Brabant, which is the southern part of Netherlands. And we negotiated with them, and we got the exclusive. The company that I had joined got the exclusive for distribution in the United States. And together with them, we developed marketing plans and packaging for the American market and for the. Whereas in Europe in those days, when you walked into a store, there was always a clerk that would give you the product. And although they had nice displays, you still had to have some of that service to you. Today, you walk into a store as a Bed Bath & Beyond or Linen and Things, where the product sits on a shelf without sales help, and somebody has to, so everything on that shelf saying, hey, mister, buy me, it's great stuff. So I got very much involved with the packaging, again, dividing space. So now here I was enclosing products, and that was fun. I traveled all over the United States, visiting. For a time, I was traveling to every single Bed Bath & Beyond store before they would open, and I would have a training session with the people on the floor, and I would explain the product, because Bed Bath & Beyond and Linen and Things, they made a point of being very service-minded to consumers walking in. To this day, when you walk into Bed Bath & Beyond, anyone on the floor, if you ask any question, they are very most helpful, and they're very knowledgeable on the, why should I buy this? What makes this one better than this one? Why should I? So you have to sort of provide them with these answers. So this I did this for many years. Would be in front of a store at 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember going on some trips where we did, I forget what city it was. We worked through the night setting, it was, I think Home Depot, as a matter of fact. It was some Home Depot, I forget what it was. Oh, in Atlanta. My brother and I, we worked through the night setting up a whole display. In other words, Home Depot would say, all right, we'll give you these 4 feet of space. It's up to you to display it with graphics and product and so on. And so that we did that. Of course, while we were there, we took the competition, put it aside someplace, hid it, you know. But this was all hands on, and it was very good. It was a lot of fun.
Okay.
And then,
Hmm?
and then,
The rest is history.
wait, you did more with Babanchas than that.
Babancha decided that they don't want to work with an importer. They felt that they could do better if they have their own office, and they asked me to set up their office, which I did very conveniently in Teaneck. And we designed a very nice space and created a very nice office in Teaneck, which was great. Commute, however, being in Teaneck, I would forget what time to leave. Anyhow, was very successful and built up the business. And at some point, I retired in '05. Retired, and I retired for 6 months. And my friend Dan Landsman, who is my friend and a neighbor here in Teaneck, asked if I would be interested in seeing the people he works for. He works for the Wilf family. I met the Wilf family, and they said, "No, we don't have a job for you. However, we're going to hire you." And I said, "Great. To do what?" And he said, "I don't know. You'll work it out." And that's the way it's been. So from '05 until now, 2011, pretty well do what I think needs to be done. I guess a lifetime of experience in being involved in business, being involved with marketing and product, and knowing what a business should represent and what a business has to represent to the public, image-wise. Pretty well can walk into any one of our properties and say it needs improvement.
You didn't say what the Wills do.
The Wilfs are they came here.
Rachel would be watching
They
this.
they are
Want to know.
the Wilfs. Harry Wilf was a survivor of the Holocaust of a concentration camp. Came to the States, bought a house and building in Astoria, sold the house, bought 2, sold those 2, bought 4. Okay, bottom line is today, Harry is no longer alive, he brought his brother into the business. So his brother's children and Harry's son and grandson are still active in the business, and we manage and own in the tri-state area 23,000 apartments. And we have properties in Florida, we have properties in California, all residential. We also own commercial properties, and we are also owners of the Vikings National Football League. Lousy record this year.
Tell
But you're on a
us what to
Viking
do
fan.
with them with the computers and how you.
When my first day on the job, my friend Dan said, well, I wanted you to help me here in the home office and to supervise properties, but we just fired a manager at one of the properties and want you to take it over. And I said, come on, Dan, I've never done this. No, you'll do fine. Anyhow, I ended up being the property manager for a property in Old Bridge, New Jersey. Property has, it's two properties combined, one office, manage and oversee almost 1,500 units, apartment units, 90 buildings. It's almost like a city. And it was fun. It was fun. It was a property that was very run down. The previous inspection, every 5 years, the state inspects the properties. So in '01, it was inspected, and there were violations. They were never fixed. It was the fine was in the six figures. So now in '06, there was the next inspection. So this was soon after I joined it. And I said, not on my watch. Bottom line is we fixed up the property, fixed up the apartments, and we had violations which is natural, but we fixed them so there was no fine. So we went from a six-figure fine, a middle six-figure fine, to a zero-figure fine. So Dan said, okay, now I could use help in working throughout the tri-state area, and that's what I do.
You talk about when you went to the property and how they were keeping their records.
Oh, I have a prop downstairs. When I came in, having worked for the Dutch company was very computer savvy. And we had server in Teaneck. We had orders were sent in by our customers, Williams Sonoma, Bed Bath & Beyond, and Linden Things, and Home Depot Supply, and all the other ones, companies. All the orders came in through the internet. So we had a lot of computer power. When I came to London Terrace, and I said, where are your records? How do you know who your tenants are? Oh, not a problem. They took out this book with loose pages, and every page had one building. So this is building 28. So they listed all the names of the people living in building 28, but it was all written in pencil. So when somebody moved out, they would erase it. Could you go down and get it, please?
No.
Because I want to show it to them.
Go see it when you do the other one. I'm not
See,
going
this
downstairs.
is great. And so I said, come on, this doesn't work. This thing is a computer. Let's get so we bought a computer, and we tried it, and all of a sudden we were using Excel, and we had all the records, and we knew people's phone numbers, we knew where they would live, and where they lived, and we knew, and all of a sudden we could develop a history for each apartment. And the owners liked the idea very much. So all of a sudden, my friend Jonathan, graduate of YU, came on board. He had just graduated, and I said, okay. So we started going to the properties and setting up computers. And all of a sudden, all the properties had computers. And all the computers would talk to each other. And all the computers would be talking to the server in the home office. So now somebody sneezes, we know exactly who sneezed and at what property and at what time. So we have a great, it's a great management tool. But we've gone through the process, and and to this day, still the hardest thing is to take people who've been working in a company for 20 years and retrain them to get away from pencil and paper and books and notebooks and stuff like that, and use the computer. So that's what it was. That was my day today. Today we had a workshop in Microsoft Office 2010, Outlook and Word, and tomorrow we have Microsoft Office 2010 Excel. And we're training the new wave, getting rid of Office 2003. We're slowly moving into from Windows 7, from XP to Windows 7. So here's an old guy who was born in 1930, today being 2011, who at 81 is still working on developing all these things. It's great.
So, last question. Where were you during the 1980 U.S. hockey game when they played the Russians?
I was glued to the television.
See, everyone knows it. Thank you,
Absolutely,
Saba.
absolutely. It was fun. Was it an hour?
Yeah.
You have
Hour,
enough to write?
10 minutes.
Yeah? You have enough to write?
Thank you, Saba. Please.
Okay.
Awesome.
Don't screw it up now.
I wanna read what you write, make it look good.
I will. How can I not make that look good?
Yeah.
You have that capacity in that camera?
The capacity? What do you mean?
Could
I
you
mean,
imagine your grandchildren
for
sitting
how
there
long-
looking
how
at
long?
this?
Yes. Are you kidding?
Each shot can only be 12 minutes
See, the
long.
thing is,
So I've had to stop the record button a few times.
How do you get to America?
But there's a 32 gigabyte card in here,
Oh.
which holds probably close to 2 hours.
You know, yesterday I was out and I said that. Hey,
Beautiful.
this is good, so I pressed my grandmother.
But then how do you
Because I knew it was
edit and
fun.
stuff like
I
that?
started becoming gorgeous in 2 days from now.